Okay, hi, Katie. Welcome to Seattle Network. Thanks so much for joining with me today. I am so excited to talk about this. I'm so excited to listen and actively listen. I think there's just so much to learn. I truly think this is going to be like a mentorship masterclass in so many
Oh,
different
no
shapes
pressure.
and forms. Okay, I think we need to set the table first, but just for
Sure.
everyone who's listening in, our conversation today is about the role of a spouse of a startup founder,
Hmm.
um, and also quality time management and interpersonal skills and dynamics. And then going in and talking about home, love, partnership, and marriage, and how that all fits in and all the things. So,
Well, that's
I,
that's the first 15 minutes, right?
yeah, yeah, for real. And I want to start off because I think this is a very important characteristic and something you have that maybe not a lot of people have, and it's something that they learned over many different years. So I want to start off by saying that your father is a divorce attorney,
Yeah, he's
right?
he's actually passed, so he was.
Was
Yes,
sorry.
he was a
And
divorce attorney.
yeah, and so when you grew up and that all happened, I mean, not a lot of people are usually in a household one that learns about principles, about agreements, going through
Hmm.
conflicts and everything. It's not like, an attorney, like my friend who's an attorney who does like really cool things like patents and trademarks and stuff like that. This is very different. And
Very different.
you were, yeah, and you were able to even subconsciously be able to understand how he operated, how he saw all the things, and then
Hmm.
going into, your life. But a lot of people usually are get exposure of it in
Hmm.
other different ways and other means along the road and later times in life. And so you were able to see and have that exposure of, what is all kind of going down. So I think that's actually a huge advantage. I think a huge advantage in life. Because even going into this whole business stuff, I've learned that it's not really anything different
It's
about
not.
agreements, right? It's about expectations, alignments, agreements, knowing how to both walk away, knowing how to be like, no, this is a really good match, what you are
Hmm.
compromising, what the strengths look like. So you're able to have a really awesome naked eye to identify quickly, and then also have the skills, the soft skills that are the probably the most important soft skills is high EQ, to be able to say how do we adapt and have the lexicon and the conversations to be able to then change the agreements or adapt it based on the evolving rate of your life. That seems like how I can't wait for you to share it because I just feel like it's just like it's the absolute roller coaster that a lot of these people go through.
Oh, my
And,
heart just, yeah.
so can you tell me a little bit more about how those skill sets, I think, just overall has kind of shaped you in taking you out from the mud and also accelerating as well. Like it's I think it's like a double-edged sword.
It is. And I will say that I have far, growing up, it was an autocracy, right? I had no say, but I still learned the skills. And I'm happy to say that in my marriage, it's a partnership, right? It was not a partnership when I was growing up, but I did learn how to make my case and present my case. And I, you know, one of the worst things as a kid would be going to basically pitch my dad on something unprepared, right? It would just tank, right? Because, he had a very keen mind and a very clever mind, right? Very nimble. And so he would see the flaws that I wouldn't. And so that was a learning experience for me. But I did learn that everything is negotiable, and everything's negotiable.
Everything.
Everything. And everything can be resolved in conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're willing to take a deep breath and set everything aside and just converse person to person about what you want and what they want, and what you said is so important, the active listening, right? To hearing what's really being said, right? So I got married in 1998, and in 2000, my husband, and I'm still married to the same guy. Awesome.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Hey, 26 years and counting,
Oh,
it's wonderful. Yeah.
that's lovely.
Yeah, I made a commitment that I was going to do this once.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so here's the beginning of the roller coaster.
Yeah. Lay out the
married
table
in
first. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So can I go on with the roller coaster?
Well, let's lay out the table first, because
Oh, okay.
I think a lot of founders today, especially here in the Seattle city and area and the PNW area, a lot of them are technical founders. And
Yes.
a lot of them have, they're usually an engineer that becomes a CEO. They've never been in business before, kind of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
they're learning a lot. They're learning a lot about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they're usually the average age of being an entrepreneur is usually around 50. And so, but a lot of that is not, that's the average rate, but a lot of them, especially in tech, are not at that age when they're doing that. And
Right.
so they're learning along the way, how to be a mature adult, how to also how to also be that adult and reparent themselves along the way, because they are responsible of so many staff members. They are responsible of, regulating not only like in business and, charting through a lot of uncertainty, but they're dealing with a lot of people. So it's a lot of people management that they end up, they're like, shit, that's not what I wanted to do. I just wanted to build
Right.
an
How did
awesome.
I just want to sit in my office and
Yeah.
look at my mechanical keyboard and write code, right? Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
I get
And then
it.
they're like, so if we can kind of lay the land a little bit of like, because I think when the story happens, it's going to be like, okay, that's your complementary strengths. And that was,
Right.
his complementary strengths, and that's how you guys were a team, and that's how you
Right.
guys were able to work things out. Because everyone who's listening, they can't take this and be like, well, my partner doesn't do this and this and this and this and this and that, because everyone's different. You're just a
Right.
really unique cocktail recipe, so we need to understand what the ingredients are first.
So where would you like me to begin? I can talk about his career briefly.
And I think, and also if you guys met for love as well, and how that worked out. Okay, yes.
Yeah. So my husband is Craig Eisler, and he was in, he started writing compiler software like 1,000 years ago. So if that doesn't,
1,000 years ago.
there were dinosaurs.
Original Gladiator.
Yeah, exactly. That's what OG means. So,
Yeah.
but he's Canadian. He came to the States in 93. He went to work for a very large tech company. He was writing code. Ironically, they hired him originally as an evangelist, which is hysterical because it just is. You got to know the guy, but he's much happier sitting behind a keyboard than evangelizing. But he's really good at it. So he was at Microsoft. He wrote all the original code for DirectX, which is now, it's the basis of the Xbox. It's the basis of the Kinect. It's in one form or another, pretty much on every PC. And, I think the motto of his life and my life and then our lives is, you can't do that. And we're like, yeah, okay, watch me, right?
I love that.
You know, hold my latte and watch this, right?
I
So,
love it. Yeah.
so he had been there until, so he was there. He had moved into a GM role, into a CVP role. Things got bananas. And he was like, I wonder what it would be like to do a startup.
I wonder.
Or actually, no, that's a big fat hairy lie. So, what happened was, so we got married in 98, kind of in the middle of all of this. And it was
the banana time. Like,
yeah, I mean, it was like the heyday. It was very carefree. There was a lot of money. It was really fun. And everybody was working really, really hard. Right. And work hard, play hard. It was kind of like college with money in a way.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, that's my hot 2 cents. It's not I'm not throwing shade at all, right?
No, it's camaraderie. It's really close camaraderie.
Yeah.
You have to be in the blood and thick and things, and you have to be really close together. It is imperative to be able to really make awesome stuff. But at the same time, you get rewarded for that. Yeah,
absolutely. And, you know, I was thinking about, in prep for this talk, I was thinking about my growing up and how I always kind of wanted to be that house on the block where all the kids hung out.
Oh my gosh, that's a dream. Yeah.
I know, right. And I never was. Except then I married my husband, and I married into all of this camaraderie. And really at the time it was predominantly brotherhood and you know, when and now there's more equanimity. But at the time, I married into this, and I knew, because of my upbringing and my personality and my exposure in my life, how to do that and how to manage that, right? And it's like, oh, okay, you want to have 150 people over for a Christmas party? I think that, like, it wasn't that he wanted to. I was like, this is a thing that would be really great for morale. This is a real, you know, let's have a piano player. Oh my God, you're
awesome. Yes.
Right? Like, so, sorry, I have paint on my hands.
Okay.
So we got married in 98. It was like the heyday. All this stuff was happening. Actually, the CVP stuff came later because Craig was a Microsoft boomerang.
Okay, but this is pre-startup, though. You married him pre-startup.
Pre-startup.
Yeah.
So
you already knew he was a high performer, and then you had to deal with his high performer life.
I mean, when we first got together, we had to have conversations that you don't go into the office on Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, no.
Yeah.
You just don't.
I can totally, yeah.
So, in 2000, a friend of mine said, hey, my husband wants to talk to your husband about something. And I was like, okay, right? And sure. And I have a big point to make about this to your founders out there in just a minute. And what they wanted to talk about was bringing Craig into a startup, right? And being a founding member. Yeah. Well, yeah, pretty much, but not really. So legally it wasn't poaching, right? So Craig heard what they had to say. You know, we were kind of flying high. Everybody was in 98. And so he said, yes. So here we go. Is that enough table setting? Would you like more table setting?
No, I think that's great. Yeah.
Okay, great. So in 2000, he left Microsoft. The stock market tanked. He started a startup, and I got pregnant all within 30 days of each other.
Holy cow.
Holy cow. So, you know, if we had a family crest, which we don't, it would say "Go big or go home," right? Like,
maybe that is the crest. Oh my
if
god!
we had one, the family motto was at that time "Go big or go home." So
Yeah.
it was all the
Mm.
nitty gritty stuff, and I think so much of it is your tolerance for risk, right?
Yes.
And I didn't think my marriage was at risk because it wasn't, but it's like, we all have ideas of how we want to live and what kind of life we want to have. And, Craig and I are both, we weren't, especially at the time, particularly risk averse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, yeah, we both had a very much like LFG. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Okay, what
Mm-hmm.
needs to be done.
Yeah.
And so it was a mobile services platform called Action Engine, and it was based in Redmond. And he did that from 2000 to 2004. And I don't know exactly how big the company got, but it got fairly big, right?
Like employee size, I guess maybe
Yeah,
that would be helpful
I'm going
too.
to say 100 people, maybe a little bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So from 3, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And, it's funny because I'm married to a guy who's an introvert, but has more charisma than he knows what to do with, and can talk to 5,000 people, right? He got interviewed by Dave, is it Dave O? Anyway, he can talk to 5,000 people, no problem, but it's not his preference, right?
That is the highest compliment. That is a really high compliment of your partner. Wow.
Yeah, I think the world of him, and the thing about marriage, and especially being a startup spouse, is in marriage, sometimes you don't believe in yourself, but your partner does, and vice versa. And sometimes you just have to hold on to your partner's belief when yours is faltering, right?
Yeah.
So I believe in him 100%. I have since pretty much the day we met, and I brought that attitude to being a startup spouse, right? Like, let's do this, So I was in the office. I was holding down the fort because he raised a bunch of money. He raised about $35 million in $2,000, right? $2,000 in a down market. Because remember, the bubble burst because people were selling freeze-dried poodle shit on the internet. And they were.
This is the real talk.
Yeah, this is the real thing, right?
Oh, we're such internet degenerates. It's really coming out, Katie.
So, and you know what? God bless them, because they figured out how to sell it to people so that they wanted it, right?
Yeah.
And they were able to make lives for themselves and their families and their employees. And I throw no shade. I have nothing but admiration. I will giggle.
That's the hustle.
I will giggle because it's funny, right? But good for them, right? Somebody invented the Post-it. Somebody, we all, I don't know. It's great, right? But it was a time of a lot of innovation and a lot of enthusiasm and then the bubble burst, and it was like, okay, how can we make this work, right? So it became more infrastructure, like the industry or the startup landscape became less frivolity and more infrastructure. Right.
And how many co-founders were there?
I believe there were 3.
Three total with him?
In total with him, yeah.
Okay.
And he had the most big tech experience. Right?
And what did the other 2 bring to the table, in the sense of, like, if he was, like, the technical?
They were both, I honestly, and I'm embarrassed to say, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3, but I know
That's
for
okay.
sure one of the other guys brought a very technical background, and my spouse was the unicorn that could write code till, you know, his ears fell off his head or his fingers
Oh.
were numb, but also could talk to people, right? And
Hmm.
so he did the money raising. He also
Wow.
worked with engineering. I mean, it's a startup, so
Yeah.
at first, especially, it's all hands on deck,
Mm.
right? And it's that camaraderie that we had, that he had, that I married into, that continued.
So
Um,
pause there for a second. So
sure.
when he was raising money and stuff like that, obviously that's like a whole full-time job in itself, the actual fundraising side of it.
Yes.
And, with your background and your support and partnership and how much of an equal partnership you guys are in, how did you guys communicate, and because you're his backbone basically. So like, and the
Um,
soundboard and stuff like that, like how did he ask for, or why, or how did he ask for your support when he wasn't sure, for example, or really respected your opinion?
so the first thing is how we communicated
Hmm.
was, and this is a very literal answer, via text, right? That's how we communicated. We just, and I will say, if it was an emergency, we had a phone call thing, right? Like, I would let it ring twice and hang up, and then he would know it was me, and I would call right back. But totally, totally. Um,
Got it. So that was your guys' like,
yeah, because we
that's
had to
super
keep it
cute.
short. We had to keep it to the point. We had
Mhm.
to keep it, but we had to keep it open, right?
Yeah.
We had to keep the lines flowing. And so, however that works for a partnership is however it works, right? And because he was in front of people all day and with people all day, I deferred to his way of doing it, because I wasn't, I didn't have boots on the ground like he did,
Yeah. You
right?
didn't have the visibility. You couldn't get the context
I
of
couldn't.
all that stuff.
There was no way.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of traveling, and a lot of traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast
I
and up and
bet.
down the West Coast. Um, and it was just doing my best to be a steady presence, right?
Mm.
And having it, like, I don't want to say it wasn't being Pollyanna, but it was like, wow, yeah, that sounds tricky. What are you gonna, like, tell me about how it feel? I mean, it's very, well, it's partnership, right? It's like, how do you feel about that, right? What action are you going to take? What do you, how do you think it's going to go, right? Like, just talking about it. I mean, it's intimate, but it's still pretty high level, right?
Mm.
But it
Because you
was,
trust the other person to be able to move forward of what needs to be handled.
yeah. I mean, it wasn't my area of expertise, right? What
Mhm.
he was doing. My area of expertise at that point was manning the ship, right? And
Yeah.
keeping everything ship shape to the degree that I could. And if something, I don't want to say pick my battles, but much like actually with my dad, I had to pick what was important, right?
Mm.
What can I solve myself? What do I need to take to my spouse? What can I solve elsewhere? Right? Because time was the biggest premium,
Yeah.
right? Time and undivided attention.
Yeah.
And I will
Because they need the
say,
focus too, because everything is going haywire. They have to deal with all the things. And so the amount of
and you
capacity that they have is kind of limited.
and they have to deal with the capacity of the employees partners, right?
Yeah, there's also that.
Because, you know, we
Yeah.
all have different tolerances. We all have different zones of genius,
Mm-hmm.
and we all have different needs, right? And so uh, I was able to be on my own and comfortable in my marriage, and very rarely would, you know, it would have to be something monumental for me to interrupt his day. Some spouses were getting phone calls that, like, somebody couldn't figure out how to shut off the water, or they couldn't, there were things that I had known how to, anyway, to me, they were things people should have known, but that's not a very charitable or compassionate viewpoint. And I see that now, right? I did mention I got pregnant, and
Yeah. Just,
yeah, twice during the startup. I had a baby in just November of 2000, and a baby in April of 2003.
Oh my
And
God.
and you know, I knew there wasn't really going to be this thing called paternity leave, right?
You know, we can talk about that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and some of this, I mean, we were all in our early-ish 30s, and
Yeah.
so spouses were having babies, right?
Yeah.
And I was able to temper my expectations, right?
How did
I
you
was
do that?
Pardon?
How did you do that?
You know, I'm sure it wasn't as elegant as I think it was. I'm sure I was snotty at some point, but I got it, right? Like,
Yeah.
it was almost like baking a cake. Like, you have ingredients, right? And if you don't have all the ingredients, you don't get the same cake, right?
Right.
So it's like, I learned very quickly, even pre-startup, that what was needed most was uninterrupted time for my partner, right? To manage whatever it was. So, you know, I hate to say this, but I sucked it up a lot because it was not how I was accustomed to being,
So
right?
how did you get your needs met when being pregnant for the first time? And I mean, like, support system wise of like,
Yeah.
oh,
So,
you know, there's this thing called belly now and this is
yeah,
happening.
there's
And,
this,
you know,
yeah.
like there's a logistic side of it, but then also like,
Right. So,
yeah.
you know, the thing that's always been great about my partnership is if I ask and it is important, no problem. So, pardon me, you know, I don't know how they do it anymore. It's been a while since I've had a baby. But, you know, you have routine checkups, but then as you get closer to your due date, it's every week, right? And so on important, I mean, they're all important because you're making human beings, right?
Yeah.
But if it was like just a routine, you know, check in, I would usually go alone. He went to every OBGYN toward the end, right, where it was weekly. And, you know, he went to the ultrasound with me. He went to, if it was a big appointment, he was there, right?
And was that because he prioritized it or something that you guys talked about what was defined as big?
If I recall, because again, a long time ago, but I think it was a combination, right? It was like, it was important to him and it was important to me. And so I could say, okay, this one's not important. This one is important. You know, he
And going
wouldn't,
through that scorecard together.
yeah, exactly. And it wasn't keeping score, right? I think that's one of the very, very important things as a startup spouse is don't keep score, right? Like, it just breeds resentment and animosity. And I mean, my view may be simplistic, but you're in it together. So why are you keeping score?
Mm.
Now, that said, I could see the weight that my husband was pulling. And it's like, okay, what can I do to contribute to that, not detract from it or draw his attention, right?
And that was you stepping into his frame in a way
Yeah,
and choosing that this is the lifestyle, this is what we want to do, and which I think is very important to talk about,
yeah,
because a lot of people, they do get married like really young and stuff, and they didn't know that this was part of the trajectory and plan.
yeah,
You know, and
right.
they're like, wait, what the heck is going on? I didn't know that you were
No,
so into this kind of thingy. But
I didn't know you had a freezer full of ears. No, sorry.
hilarious.
So, marriage has enough surprises, right? It just
Uh-huh.
does. And, uh, you know, there are things that are important to know going in, right? And the three biggest stressors in any marriage are money, children, and sex, right? And what people's what people's expectations are, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, do you want to have kids? How many kids do you want to have? And but not just talking about that, but talking about, do you want to raise them in a religion? Do you want to raise them not
Yeah.
in a religion but with faith? What kind of education do you think is important? Right? Do you want to homeschool? I did not. Uh, and so you and I have talked about this previously, and I learned this from my father because of his profession. One of the things that really contributes to the success of a marriage, which was surprising to me at the time, is common financial goals,
Yeah.
right? And really talking about, okay, what are they? Do we share them? And getting into the nitty gritty. And if they are aspirational,
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to do that? Right? And how do we do that together so that it doesn't build animosity and resentment? And so it is a group effort and nobody's left, or a joint effort and nobody's left in the cold.
Right. And I love that, because I think it's that reflection of what is your relationship with money and where you want to go with that, and
Hmm.
the level of ambition, right? Because it's not, the failing is always kind of there, it's always present, and that's just the part of the life part of it all. But
Yeah,
it's like, are you guys going in the same direction? Is that something that you both want? Because there's a lot of sacrifice that's involved to get there. It's not just going to be like it's handed over to you. It's going to be
right.
hard, and whatever hard means, and what is necessary. But if someone is complacent about a certain range, for example, and that's what they want, that's great, and that's what makes them happy. But you're then might be living in two different realities, right?
Right.
And then the actual maximization of partnership might not actually be realized.
Right. And to make it very simple, it's like, say somebody only wants to live in a tropical climate and somebody only wants to live above the Arctic Circle. You
Yeah.
gotta figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Um, I will say one of the things that was pretty neat, um, is pretty neat about our partnership is that I've been able to travel, and I learned how to travel without my husband. Um,
What do you mean by that? Tell me more.
so when he
What's the
was
before and
running
after?
Action Engine, and I had Angus,
Mhm.
baby number one, who's now almost 25. Uh, I had an invitation to go to Cape Town, South Africa for a month. So I took my 3-month-old son and I got on a
Goodness.
plane and I went to London, and I spent 4 days in London, and then I flew from London to Cape Town. And this was with a woman that I had met through a spouse in the startup.
Okay.
So, and I was able to do that, and Craig was raising money, and it's not like he wouldn't have seen us, but I had this opportunity, right? And we talked about it, and it worked, right? It was like, it's pretty much a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah.
And Cape Town's lovely, by the way. So, but getting back to what you were saying about communicating and negotiating, we put things on the calendar. So we had a communal calendar. We had a communal Outlook calendar. And when our kids got old enough, they used it too, right? So we had a family calendar. We had it all categorized. We could see when people were available, when they weren't. But Craig and I had a date night every Saturday night.
That was the non-negotiable.
That was the non-negotiable. Every Saturday night. And we still do. Right?
Oh.
Now
is super sweet.
It is. It is.
That
And
is-
sometimes, sometimes we go out. We used to go out every weekend. And sometimes, but now it's like we pop popcorn and Netflix and chill, right?
Yeah.
But when it was startup land, there were so many events, right? They were they were recruiting very heavily, right? There was the infamous bacon cart in front of, I believe it was Amazon, right? Where they had a guy, I think he was dressed as a piece of bacon, and they were cooking bacon, and they were luring people to recruit with the smell of bacon.
Hey, what works.
What works, right? They were giving away a PT Cruiser, right? They were doing
anything.
Anything,
Yeah.
right?
The best talent. Advertising, this is what I'm talking about. When I talk to, okay, I have to put this in here because
Please.
Advertising is not just to your prospects and customers, and it's not just pitching to your investors. It's also the side door of your house, which are like your talents. And you have to be like promoting what that story is to attract a talent. A-level talent.
Yes. And if they does the job,
Build something. Sorry, it's just
no, and I think you're right, and it's not only recruiting, but it's branding, and then what it does inside the company is it makes it I can't
culture.
think of the word, much more collegial, right?
Yeah.
There's to use your word again, there's a camaraderie.
Yes.
There's like the brotherhood of bacon or whatever you want to call it, right? But there's I've just lost all the Orthodox people. They're like, I'm gone.
No, a friend and Fang was telling me how they had, I think it was like last year, a couple quarters ago, it was a huge debate over crispy or soft bacon in the cafeteria, in the free cafeteria. It was a huge big deal on Slack. I mean, like it's...
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I get it completely. There's something else. Part of the camaraderie. I know this is a ridiculous. I love this conversation. You wanted real. This is about as real as it gets, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the things we did is we had barbecues. We had get-togethers. We had keg parties. We did all of these things, and we did them as a group, and we got to know each other, and everybody was included, right? And that inclusivity has your spouse buy-in, right? It has the kids. I mean, there are people from that startup that became uncle to my children.
Yeah,
Right?
I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and I think that, so there's this thing I wanted to talk about that we have talked about, not here, but briefly. And I'm speaking directly to the founders,
Okay.
right? This is something, it's a resource that you have if you have a partner that I guarantee you are underutilizing, and it is the spouse network. It is, I call it the wife network because that's what I am part of. See the earlier point. Somebody contacted me about Craig becoming a CEO.
Right.
Right. So oftentimes, we'd be sitting at date night or whatever, and I would hear breaking news from him, and I'm like, oh yeah, I heard that from so and so's wife like a week ago. You're a little, or I would totally steal his thunder and scoop him. And I'm like, did you hear that so and so's on the way out at this company? And he's like, what? I'm like, he's like, how do you know this? I'm like, it's a wife network.
This is perfect. Oh my God, I'm gonna cry.
I know. It sounds ridiculous. But it's like, it's like you married or you partnered with this person for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And ideally, you picked your partner because you thought they were smart. So listen to them, right? Like,
weird concept. That's a crazy concept, Katie.
Banana pants.
An intellectual with another. Whoa.
Yeah, right. And so, and now,
oh God,
it still is going on, right? There's still wife network stuff going on. There's still like, we used to call it the grapevine, right? Hearing things through the grapevine, but this is more direct and it's more immediate, right? And I don't feel like I ever betrayed a confidence, right? I wasn't sharing, or, there was no insider information going on.
But that's
legally.
I just want to talk about that for a moment because it's like, in the startup community, it's very much, especially in B2B, it's very much like relationship-based sales. Yeah. And it is like the one sale that's going to be a huge contract that can literally make or break the whole freaking thing. It can make and break your staff roster. It can make and break the promises that you were supposed to make to your investors and constituents, right? And it is something that I don't think people really understand. Relationships isn't just outside, it's also the inside as well. But then it's how can you be a good steward to make sure that the people around you that you are invested in, by their time is on your calendar and you are interacting with them for a reason, and normalizing the trade of not necessarily like give and take, but you're part of your world, right? They're a character in your world. You are the main character. There's a character in your world, and you guys are mutually respecting each other, and you guys are benefiting from each other in some shape and form. And in that way, how do you care about them? You can't not care about them if you don't know what the heck is going on. And also knowing like, oh my gosh, if they need help, how could I have help or put something together to be able to help and organize to mobilize, like what you're saying, the 150 folks, hosting something or whatever, right? For morale and stuff like that. It's like, okay, we messed up 2 quarters in a row. And I really need us to have a good mindset, for us to do a reset. We're going to have a massive, brainstorming session going into Q2 kind of thing. Like, I need everyone to be on the same ship again, like doing all the CEO stuff, whatever. And it's like, how do we do that? Because the inside, if you're going to like, you want the inside your company to be the reflection on the outside, because you can see it. Customers can see it, prospects can see it, investors can see it. They can see it more than you think they
and
can.
feel it and its energy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
as we've talked about, verbal communication is like 6% of all communication, right? It's tone, it's body language, it's all sorts of different things that we perceive, even if we can't articulate it. You know, one of the biggest challenges in a partnership, in my partnership, I'll say, is educating the other person as to what is and is not important to me, right? Like,
But you have
I
to be
want to know
honest.
what, pardon?
You have to be honest.
Yeah, I want to know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't necessarily need to know every, if you're doing a bug bash, I don't need to know about every bug, right? Like, I don't. But, I need more than a high level. I need much more than everything's good, right?
Yeah.
I need a sense of, because I'm in the car. Imagine if you're in a car and you're in the passenger seat and somebody's driving and they're not telling you where they're going. It's absolutely, it can be scary. It can be terrifying. So knowing the pathway.
Drop me off in the next rest stop.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And I'll call a cab.
Yeah. But really, like, having a sense of what's going on, and it can be as simple as, and this sounds so trite, but how was your day, hun? And they're like, oh, I met with, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then we got them in the room together, and boy, did they not get along, and I felt super uncomfortable, and they were arguing about the gross revenue of their latest films, and they were comparing it, so being an ear for it, right?
Because what did that information help you to do?
It helped. So first of all, it gave me visibility, right?
Yeah.
It gave me visibility. And so through the visibility, I felt more connected to my spouse. And because I felt more connected, I was more willing to show up in a way that I knew served him and the company.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Bingo.
Yeah. I mean, and I will say that, with so many people, so many engineers, and so many, so many engineers. My husband has a background in mathematical physics just for fun, because, why not?
Just for fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the social niceties and the social aspect of branding, relationship building, something as simple as gift giving that they don't think is important is, right? It's that humanity. It's that human touch. It's the intangible and the ineffable beyond the spreadsheets.
Beyond the spreadsheets. Sorry, this talk is the best. Oh my God, I love you.
It's my pleasure and privilege to be here. So it's adding the human touch, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things is they had pet bearded dragons at the startup.
I can believe that. I can see it.
Right. It was part of the zeitgeist, right? It was like, literally, it was like when my kids had a pet turtle named Crash in their classroom, right? And like, it would be Christmas break and somebody would have to take the turtle home, right? Like, same thing, right? Yeah. So how did I support my husband? Well, if you don't know bearded dragons, you know what I'm going to say. they eat live crickets. So I would see where I could help, right?
Mm.
Like where I could be useful.
This is
And
identifying white spaces and gaps and the opportunities of
yeah,
how to, for them to be able to focus on what they actually have to do.
yeah,
Because if they were in a meeting, right, and it was these people weren't liking each other, it obviously is going to impact and affect his performance for that day, which means
right,
that other things are probably going to get neglected. But then also, how can he feel supported that he can just focus on the thing that is a little bit troublesome, and
right,
which, all people are. So, by knowing that intellectually, it's like, okay, where can I, put the padding in and stuff like that, that he
right,
doesn't feel like he is losing control on
right,
the things where he actually needs to put all his energy to be able to control, to solve that blocker so that he can move on. Because
right.
with how much he was dealing with, how fast he went from 3 to 100 plus whatever staff members.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
it's
That's
a
a lot. And then
lot.
like babies and stuff like that and all that kind of stuff
Yeah,
and dealing with everyone. And so you're really, by him texting you in the way how you guys
yeah,
communicate and being able to be like, hey, how's your day? Well, this happened, that happened. It's like, okay, well, how can, and I don't even, it's probably like, you're it's almost like you're like his like twin computer processor in a way. And when you're like processing it, you're like, okay,
yeah,
what does he need? What can we do? What are the areas? And like you said, you were manning the ship, and in that way
yeah.
you were his lifeboat.
It's
And
like
that's
being
really
a RAID
beautiful.
2 instead of a RAID 6, right? So, yeah. And
Yeah.
so, two things. One, I will very quickly. So I went and bought crickets for the bearded dragons. And if you ever get bearded dragons, crickets can eat through plastic. So I had a
It's good to know.
brand new car,
Oh
brand
God.
new car, 5 months pregnant. I'm like, oh, I'll just leave the crickets in the car overnight and take them to the office in the morning. I had 500 crickets who chewed through the plastic in my brand new car. Like,
Oh
so I'm pregnant, 5 months pregnant, headlamp in my car picking crickets out.
yeah. I'm guessing that line item was, this is not important, I will handle it.
Yeah. But I do want to say something. I know, it's ridiculous. It's
Life.
ridiculous.
This is exactly
Right,
it, though. Things
exactly.
happen. Sometimes when
Right.
you are trying to help too, some things might go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And there were things that he didn't need help with, right? That I wanted to help with. So we have an
Such
expression in
as,
our house, which is, it's only help if the other person says so.
I love it.
So it's like, don't help me, don't help me. So when that was said, our job is to listen, right? Now, I don't want to paint the picture that I was sitting there at his beck and call
Yeah.
to fulfill his every whim. No, I was not, right?
Yeah.
I was building a life as a newlywed. We were essentially newlyweds when he started the startup, right? We'd been married about a year and a half. And, and I was navigating new motherhood, and I was navigating in-laws and married life and all this stuff. My hands were a little full. So yes, I contributed, and yes, I stood behind him, and I have had and have unwavering belief in him and in us, and we're a good working pair, right? Like, we can say, okay, you do this, I'll do that. We can divide things that way. I will say, during my second pregnancy, which was also during the startup, it was a very, I had a life-threatening medical condition during the pregnancy.
Oh gosh.
And
Whoa.
I almost died and we almost lost the baby. And
Oh,
yeah, the doctor like
wow.
sat me down and had the talk with me that like if this didn't work.
I
And I was
see.
very newly pregnant. I was like 8 weeks pregnant, right?
Okay.
Happily, that child is about to turn 22. Everybody's good. But you put that on top of being enmeshed in a startup, and this is now 2003. So that's a huge amount of people in the company with a lot of reach, a lot of press, a lot of everything. And while navigating a toddler and a pregnant wife who, I mean, I was in the ICU for a week, right?
Jeez.
And we did our best, you know? And if I needed him, but like needed him, not like, oh, I'm going to text you so you can get me a glass, come home from work and get me a glass of water.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. But that,
Um,
wait, hold on. But up to that point, you guys have had so much reps to be
yeah,
able to normalize what was important and not. Like you guys had practice.
yeah, we had practice and it is muscle. It is doing reps.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to say, you know, like, don't do that. Knock that shit off or whatever,
Yeah.
however you speak to each other,
Yeah.
or to say it more kindly, you know, that doesn't work for me. But
Yeah.
to follow it up with, this is what does work for me.
That is the important part.
Right. So
It's
there's an
literally the
X,
partnership part.
right. There's the XYZ of it all. When you do X,
Mm-hmm.
I feel Y. What I'd like to have happen is Z. Right.
Yeah.
And so doing that, sometimes it's hard, right? It's just hard, even if you've been married 26 years, right? Because people are people. But being able to say, oh, you want to travel during our anniversary, but I'm not going. No, that doesn't work for me, right?
Yeah.
So, and or my spouse saying, no, this is not. I'm going to pick a silly example, but like this is not a spouse event, right? This is just
Mm-hmm.
employees only.
Mm-hmm.
But it was rare, but it happened. But I really welcomed the fun and the challenge, and it was an adventure, right?
Yeah.
And I I mean, I was still getting to know him really and myself as a partner.
See,
Um
this is the crazy part because he's also doing version control himself and yourself. You guys are going at a rapid rate of personal growth and then also figuring out this thing of how being a team together, let alone being individuals.
yeah.
That's the interdependency. This is what I mean. It's like, of like, you're such a, to me, a success story because you guys are rapidly changing. You have to. The
Yeah.
conditions and circumstances. It was not an option, but you guys chose the
Mhm.
direction of where you want to go, and that's what made it okay. And that's what you're saying. Let's fucking go. Let's go.
Yeah.
You know. But for
Yeah.
that support to happen, all the details didn't really matter because you guys were going in that same direction
Right. What was
and can accept
required
the
was
other
whatever was
person.
required, and it was immaterial in a way
Yeah.
because we had a compact or an agreement that we were just going to do it, right?
Yeah.
And we were going to, and I don't even know that it was articulated that way. It was just you in, I'm in, let's go, right? Like,
Signed a freaking dotted line.
it was kind of like,
This is the commitment.
yeah. And so it really is for me in terms of marriage. Are you in or are you in or are you out? Right? Like, are you building a life together or are you building a life separately? Right?
Yeah.
And it's iterations, right? And it's like, oh, we're doing this now. Okay. Didn't know that. okay, let me XYZ, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's like, hey, I know this person who wants to make an introduction to this media mogul. I think you should fly to New York and take the meeting. Oh, no, 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 I don't want to take the meeting. Well, here's why that meeting might be beneficial to you, right?
Yeah.
Because this person owns half of the media landscape or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Um, so,
But even for that example, as an example scenario, it's like the startup life is so hard. There's the burnout thing, there's things going on all the time.
mhm,
And sometimes, you're kind of that cheerleader and the support's like, you should
yeah,
probably do that, even though you're going to miss XYZ or you just want to do XYZ. But
absolutely.
this might actually be something that's going to, because you're always increasing the surface level of luck, right?
Hmm.
Or it's the surface area of luck. And so if you're not going to meet someone halfway, right? You
Hmm.
never know. You would never know unless you went and found out. And that
Yeah,
is the exploratory side of things and trusting each other that adventure is worth it because you wouldn't know unless you went and found out.
right. And you have to also believe that you have each other's best interest at heart. So there's
Yeah.
spouse A, spouse B, and then there's the relationship,
Oh,
which
yeah, that
needs
part.
things that part that needs tending, right?
Yeah.
Because it's
The
a living
nurturing.
organism. And so like date night, right?
Yeah.
And also acknowledging that your partner has skills that you don't have and you have skills that your partner doesn't have, right?
Yeah.
And I grew up knowing how to do a lot of these social things, right?
Mm.
And my husband didn't. And so he would say, I don't
But he
know.
benefited so much from you because,
Yeah.
you know,
But it was also,
it's,
I remember at one point we had a friend in the startup who was a very good dresser, like very snappy dresser, right? And I basically convinced him to take my husband to Nordstrom, like take him out for drinks,
Mhm.
put a couple martinis in him, take him to Nordstrom, get him some goddamn new clothes, right? Because
Mhm.
he was an engineer. He was comfortable,
Yeah.
right? But you
Mhm.
can't, presentation matters, whether it's your
Yeah, and
company
especially
or
the
you,
role of CEO as well.
especially, right?
Yeah.
So there were some things like that where I had to guide, right? But
Stick some
spouses do that.
martinis in him. Yeah.
I know. It was a long time ago. But
I love it.
I will say about the kids, this is important too.
Yes.
A lot of times we spent the weekend at the startup, right? Like I would bring the kids to him so he could
Mm.
spend time with them.
Mm.
And they were little enough that worked, right? And then
Yeah.
um he was able to, as they got a little older, he was able to have his time with them, first one, then both of them, going to the park or
Oh.
going to a play place at McDonald's or, whatever it
Yeah.
was, but
Yeah.
just to be there, you know?
Be present.
Um, yeah, be present, do something fun for them, go play in the fountain at the Seattle Center. And he was much more suited to that stuff than I was. If I never go to Chuck E. Cheese again, I will be the happiest woman on the planet. Like, you know, we all have things
So
we're
like
suited. We all have things we're suited to, and we all have things we're not, right? But it was okay. What's important? Well, the kids need to see their dad. Their dad needs to see the kids. How are we
yeah.
going to handle this? And so I had to let go of my expectations, right? Like, we're not going to have a family breakfast with pancakes and birds chirping and, sunshine and unicorns and leprechauns on my front lawn. We're just not,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
dinner always at 6, for example, with
Oh, forget it.
yeah.
Forget it. And that kind of stuff has actually been hard.
Those commercials.
It's been, you know, having a non-traditional family schedule has been,
That's a great way to put it.
yeah, it's been tough, right?
Yeah.
One of our children was diagnosed diabetic, type 1 diabetic, so insulin
Okay.
dependent, when they were 6.
Yeah.
And that was after the startup. But we had
Okay.
moved to the East Coast, so my partner could take a job. And we just realized the job had already ended. It was just not a fit. But he pre-negotiated his exit, people. Pre-negotiate your exit.
You're
So
supposed to too.
I know. So
Just
but,
like this is what I mean, like when starting even this whole conversation of how you understand because your dad was a
yeah,
divorce attorney. And
yeah,
so like you know so much about agreements.
yes,
And you know, and it's also the exit, I think, is a reflection in life as well, right? So going back
yeah,
to the whole you gotta know because, and I love your coined term of a startup widow because,
yeah,
you know, at some point in time, you know, the partnership will end, you know, whether it's by nature, you know, or whatever the situation is. And so it's really important to have that conversation of like what does happen or where, you know, for like, it's so important, not when, you know, things are not working or you know or some medical situation is happening or something like that. It's really important to have those conversations so you guys know where you're going,
yeah,
and you can fully support.
yeah. And the thing for the for the spouses is you have to get really real with yourself about what your risk tolerance is and what your adventure to or roller coaster tolerance is, right? What you like, where your bottom line is, right? Like
Yeah.
when my kids were little, it was like, sure, let's move to the East Coast. They're young enough, let's go, right? On the East Coast, my one of my children was diagnosed type 1 diabetes, which for some of your listeners may not know, it's an autoimmune disease. You're insulin dependent. It's what childhood juvenile diabetes is now called. Um, and so we needed stability because our world was rocked, right? And our little one's world was rocked. And it was kind of like somebody handing you tweezers saying, here, do neurosurgery. It was like,
Yeah.
what? So we came back to the West Coast. Craig went back to Microsoft. You know, I got to have the same pediatrician for my kids. I got to have the same circle of friends, right? And expand my circle of friends. But at that point, I needed stability and I
I see.
needed to feel comfortable because there was so much instability and I was so challenged in other areas of my life, right? Keeping my child alive,
Yeah.
basically. And he's great. He's healthy. He's lovely. So, but it was an agreement, right? And it took courage for me to say, you know, I really need stability right now. I need to go shop at this grocery store. I need to drive to Mercer Island and see this pediatrician. Like
Yeah.
that would be wonderful for me. And it was great, right? It worked out beautifully. But it was a mutual decision.
But the beauty of that is when you guys first got married, you know, being settled here in the city of Seattle, you know, you guys, even through the chaos of the early stages of the startup, you know, you still were able to, you had to be somewhat independent, right, to
Yes.
do all the things. And so that was a muscle that you had to put in all the reps to be able to see the right pediatrician, do all these things, and
Yeah.
you were able to do in a way that still fit the frame of chaos.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right. And then so like you're saying that like later on in life, you know, in the East Coast, it was just like everything was almost unfamiliar, but at the same time, the juxtaposition here is like, but somehow the chaotic part of the early startup because
Yeah.
you're able to navigate that
Yes.
that actually ended up to be the stability that you crave for when dealing with a completely different challenge
Mm-hmm.
that obviously, has been a huge reward in that decision, because you saved your kid's life. And,
Yeah.
that was really important. And you guys had the same priorities, and there was a compromise because you guys both wanted the same thing and
Yeah.
understood what was best at that time. And that's really beautiful. Damn.
Yeah. I will say that, not every startup or startup partnership, spouse partnership is chaotic we bring chaos. We don't anymore, but we don't anymore, right? Because we've grown up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, and our tolerance for chaos is less. We're still super, we have a good relationship with risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
chaos and drama, no, thank you, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's almost more of a picture of us at that time than the startup. Not to say there isn't chaos and drama in a startup because, oh my God, right? Um,
Yeah.
and I will say part of it was I learned from the people around me, right? I learned from the spouses around me, and a lot of them were object lessons. Like, ooh, I don't want to be that spouse. Nope,
Yeah.
nope, nope. And some of them were
Yeah.
inspiring, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, ooh, because in my estimation, you're either an inspiration or an object lesson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
But it's exposure, right? And it gives you
yeah,
data points to be able to be like, oh, I didn't really want to go that way, or and I want to point this out too because I think there's a really weird like stigma around comparison. And I think a lot of people think that comparison is like really bad. And I
no,
do think it's because of the mainstream media for the advertising a lot of the campaigns. And I'm an advertiser. So, but we talk a lot about that of like, social media and all that kind of stuff. But then anyways, that whole thing. But in the essence of comparison, you have nothing else to be able, you need data points to
yes,
then be able to have that intellectual conversation with yourself of like, do I even want to go in that direction or that direction?
right,
And if you don't know, because you don't know what you don't know, and so having exposure to all those things help to actually, um, I think it actually doubles down your core values
mm-hmm,
and what you actually want to do. I think it actually makes you stronger if you can look at it that way. If you
yes.
know how to process it, which
Now,
I think it's a skill.
it is a skill. It is absolutely a skill, and I have had to learn how to do it without judgment, right? Because the
Yes.
judgment
Yeah.
is the toxic part. It's
Yeah.
not that one is better than another necessarily. It's like you said, this isn't keeping with my values. This isn't, right?
Yeah.
So I can look at other painters and I can now I can say, oh, they can do this thing. I don't do that thing. I do this thing. And it used to be, oh my God, I want to do this. Like super awful, whiny, yuck, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now I can say, oh, they can do this thing. Good. That thing's handled. I don't have to do it, right? Like in the universe, right? So, so yes, paying attention to the people around me, paying attention to taking my social cues from a larger sample set, right?
That's a
Because
great way to put it.
the
Yeah.
sample set I had growing up was
We're so
super
nerdy.
skewed, right?
Yeah.
It was a polluted
Yeah.
sample set. There was so much confirmation bias and so much,
Yeah.
um, I don't even know how to say it, but like complicity. If like,
Mm.
ooh, if I let you get away with this, then you'll let me get away with this, right? And, I had a lot of parents and they all parented me in different ways, but the core was kind of that, right? Nobody called anybody on their BS, is my point.
Yeah.
So, I am a firm believer that you and your partner of whatever flavor, right? But your partner and you can craft whatever life you want,
Yeah.
right? And whether that's a startup or not a startup, or working together or not working to like in the same like office or not, you know, that kind of thing. Um, but really, I've learned how to honor the idiosyncrasies in my partner. When at first they used to just really tick me off because I didn't understand them and it wasn't my way. And I was,
Right.
I've grown a lot. I've grown a lot. But, marriage will do that to you. Life will do that to you. If you let it, you can grow.
So let's
So,
talk real quick about love, because in all
yes.
of this, um, so one, I guess the main question would be, at this point, when you're even talking about the calendar, how you guys have your Saturday date night, and
Yeah.
that is a mandatory ritual, which is because you guys both wanted it, and that's why it's a non-negotiable for both of you guys. Um, I believe there's like mature love and then there's like true love. But when you first started, do you feel like, I guess, what's your story around love? And because you have such a highly EQ version of partnership and what's fair and what is teamwork, that where does love fit in all of this with you two specifically? And how is that to feel for you guys? Or what
How is
role did
that
it
what?
play? What was the role that love played?
Well, I think love, I don't think it's possible without love.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. And it's not only love for your spouse, but it's love for life, right? Like, I mean, being human is hard, right?
Yeah,
It
that
is
alone, it's really hard.
it is hard. Earth school is hard, right? Um, I've heard it
Yeah.
said that's why the planet's so beautiful is because human life here is so hard. Um, you know, I had to learn about love because I, like a lot of women of my generation, grew up with this freaking fairy tale about love, right? And it's very different than it today than it was then, from what I can tell, right? So, but the love is not negotiable, right? Like it's either there or it's not,
It's not. Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
also, you have to allow yourself to love somebody,
Mm.
right? I mean, on paper, when we first were together, everybody was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? What? No, but we knew, right? And it was it was a pretty tough adjustment for both of us to be married to each other, build a life for each other, right? We're both very passionate, exuberant people. And you also have to realize that at some point in a marriage, love isn't enough. If you're not willing to do the work, you can love me all you want, but if you can't listen to me and I can't listen to you and I can't honor what you're saying, love's not enough, right?
Yeah.
It's just not. And the truth is, there's this gets really philosophical, so I'll skip that part, but just
No, I
say
love it. Keep going.
that I chose Craig and Craig chose me, right?
Yeah.
Like he could have, this one right person myth. I don't know that there's one right person. I think that there may be 495 right people. Sorry, honey. But I picked the person I wanted to be with.
It's a choice. There's so
It
many
is a
people
choice.
on this earth.
And
Yeah.
actually, on the inside of his ring, it says, I choose you.
Oh
Right?
my God.
And, you know, you have to choose the person sometimes later in a marriage, even when you don't want to. Because this
Yeah.
person, and that goes both ways, right? But it's like, it's actually, it's a startup. I mean, a marriage in a way is a startup, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, you're either in or you're out.
Yeah.
And,
where
you know, we
where
didn't know
was
how to
it?
do it.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
Where were you when it was like the in love part was kind of the fuel rather than the mature love of it? Because I feel like the partnership that you've expressed throughout of, you know, the tactical examples, the experience, the reps and everything, I think that is the juice that is, you know, that mature love of like what you've built together, the life that you built, the rhythm. You guys are one. You guys operate as one in one calendar.
Yeah.
You guys know you have that utmost trust and integrity with each other, and wanting going that way. But the in love that when the days that are really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, like I said, you know, when Craig started the startup, it was 2000, and we got married in the summer of 98. So we were still kind of on newlywed fumes, right? And I think, you know, and that time was like, so during this, you know, when he was at Microsoft, when he left Microsoft during the startup, that was still very like crazy in love time, right? And then it just morphs, right? Like it, that initial, I don't know if they're endorphins or what they are, right? But that rush, it's like everybody's like, oh, the love went away. No, it didn't. Like if you were at that level of endorphins, you die, right? Like
Yeah.
you.
This is what I'm talking about.
It's
This is,
not sustainable.
yeah.
And you know, if you're a thrill seeker or an adrenaline junkie or it can be kind of tough.
Yeah.
Right? So you just have to navigate it in a way that works for both of you, right? And like I said at the beginning, everything is resolvable in conversation. Sometimes you might need a third party. You might need a neutral third party. You might need to go find a counselor who can just say, nope, that's not what this person's saying. Nope, that's not what this person's saying. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. If that's the tool you need to get the job done, then that's the tool. Right?
And also, it doesn't have to be when things are going wrong. It's just like we can't get through this in a way, and how to move from that point. So, because the adventure is always going to something new together, whether that's a child, whether that's, I don't know if you guys had pets, but like,
oh, so many
besides
pets.
the bearded dragon. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I grew up with dogs. Like, I grew up with dogs and horses and goats and snakes and all sorts of crazy stuff. And my husband didn't. And I was like, it's not a family without a dog. Right? And he was like, not a dog person. And now we got a dog. And I got a black lab because I knew that they're so lovable and so easygoing. And I had one shot at a dog. Right? And if I blew it, we were never going to have dogs again.
Yeah, this is a high stake kind of situation.
Oh, yeah. This is like, yeah. So we had Earl, Black Lab, and it was URL, Earl.
God, you guys are so freaking cute. Oh my God.
I know.
Oh.
So, you know, with any marriage, startup or no, there are days you wake up and you're like, I want to be here. And there are days you're like, I want to be here, but I don't know how to. Right?
Oh. Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
so keeping it open, keeping communication, right? And agreeing on the adventures, right? And at one point, you know, um Greg in the startup came to me and he said, I want to buy this super fancy car, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, like all of our financial commitments are met. You are indeed the breadwinner. If you want to buy this car, go ahead and buy it, right? And don't buy the yellow one. Not so he bought the yellow one, and I think it was like, cops were pulling him over to see the car, right? So something like being pulled over 9 times later, I'm like, dude. So I think that's the other thing, is letting the universe handle things.
Uh-huh.
So when the flat screen, like the Aqueous TVs came out, it was like
Uh-huh.
2006 or something, and they were a fortune, and they were really skinny, and he got one for the kids' playroom. I'm like, our kids do not need a really expensive, like, no, they're watching Thomas the Tank Engine. They do not need this. And he was like, no, I really want to do it. And so my job was to say, okay. 2 days later, my 5-year-old took a metal barbecue spatula and bashed the shit out of it and cracked the screen. And because you crack the screen and there's no tube, it now doesn't work. So I let the universe handle it, right?
Yeah.
So
But wait, hold on. Wait, hold on. This is a great example of um not necessarily failure, but like just letting them kind of fall on their own in a way.
yeah.
And you don't have to really defend so much about it, because they got to learn at some point. And then, like you were saying beforehand, about you don't want to grow resentment just because you're supposed to, like, even if you disagree, because you can agree to disagree, is what we're talking about kind of right now.
Yeah.
But that's really important as a example of just letting it happen. And they will know themselves too, like, okay, well, I
Yeah.
got it now. I got the memo.
Yeah, exactly. And, the stakes weren't super high. I want to point some things out, right? Nobody's life was on the line, right? Like the stakes weren't super high, but still it was an important lesson, which then taught me when my kids were school age how to let them fail, which is way harder, right? Because there's the physiological and biological connection. But it's kind of like, you do in parenting and marriage and in being a startup spouse, startup widow, for me, I never took anything for granted, right? Like I tried not to, like nothing was a done deal, right? Ever. And I didn't, how do I want to say it? Let me take a beat. We put everything we had to put into it, and that doesn't guarantee results. That, something will happen, right? But what is it? Past profits don't guarantee future results, right? Like,
Oh my gosh, Katie, yes.
yeah, like, okay, this worked one time. We're going to do the same thing, but something has changed and it doesn't
Okay,
work anymore.
but that's the thing. What gotcha here isn't exactly the role that's going to get you there, but this is why the partnership and what you're describing and what you guys were able to do to approach the problem together, to approach what was in front of you guys together. Like you were saying, like, oh shoot, this now happened. And it's not like you're going to talk about, well, why did that happen? Blah, 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 blah. It's just, it is happening, right? Like the plastic, the plastic in the car with the crickets.
Yes. But, and this is not to say
Awesome of a story. Wow, what a dinner table story.
so many of them. But this isn't to say that, we haven't really ticked each other off, right? We haven't, you got to learn how, you got to pick your battles. You got to pick if you want a battle, right? And you have to see where your values are, right? I mean, is it,
Yeah.
um, and has it been perfect? No, it absolutely hasn't, because nothing is, right? So I guess what it is how well do you tolerate the imperfections, right?
Yeah. And you guys went into battle together. It wasn't
Yeah,
like, just because it was like this whole startup thing, how, he was the founder and CEO kind of thing, and he was doing all these things. You were also doing a lot of things too.
yes,
You were doing a lot of emotional labor and also other physical labor and all the other things. And
yeah,
you were, helping to keep leading the household in your way. And he
hmm,
had to rely on you to be able to do that. And you guys relied on each other so much. And that's super beautiful because, at the end of it, I mean, what I want people to be able to take away from this really is, and I'm so grateful that you are so willing to be able to share your experience, is I would like them to be curious about themselves,
yeah,
to ask themselves, I hope this conversation kind of inspires, have I thought about this? Have I thought about that?
hmm,
And whether, they are in a startup by themselves, meaning to say that they're not married yet, or they're
hmm,
trying to look for a spouse, and maybe they're going through co-founder situations, right? And maybe they went from one startup to another. I think a lot of these lessons still apply. A lot
yes,
of these principles still apply, of communication skills, how to talk about things, how to move forward, and picking someone, and choosing someone who that you can go into battle together with,
yes,
not necessarily they're kind of like on deployment kind of thing, and then you're having separate
right, no,
lives kind of thing.
absolutely,
You're in it together, and even to the point you're saying, like, you brought the kids over to the office, bringing it to him because that was the era of that specific time.
right,
But it
right,
changes, right? And so you guys were able to still work with each other to be able to almost mold something that became like a sandcastle in a
yeah,
way. And that's super beautiful. So yeah, I think people who, and then like looking forward to what they want, but then also if they're in it and they're in it deep, and maybe, they're trying to go to the next level with like parenting and stuff like that, having these conversations. I hope this, inspires for them to think about it. And then also for people who, going back to the home environment of like, what does a good environment look like for them that they can thrive in, that
hmm,
even if they don't have that same level of support, what would that level of support, what would they need? And it goes back to
right,
your needs and wants, right? Not the
yeah.
false truths, or not something that you compromise. Like if you were to have a clean slate, what does that actually look like? What do you need in order for you to
I
be
mean,
so ambitious to tackle any chaos that comes your way and the risk?
and we talk about your wants, your needs, and your non-negotiables, right?
Yeah.
And it served us really well, right? And because what you're saying also, having our home environment be as calm as possible, he then had a refuge,
Yeah.
right? He then had a refuge, and doing some things that at first, it's also about efficiency, right? And letting go of how you think it has to be. So, uh, gift giving, right? I used to, and I still do, I send him a link and I'm like, this is what I'd like for XYZ holiday. Not the most romantic, but you know what? He gets to win because he gave me what I wanted, and I'm happy because I got what I wanted, and there was no conflict. That to me is ideal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
Because he can't read your mind and you can't read his mind.
I kind of can, but no, I can't.
That's the reps part.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it's the physics of it all. So I just think go into it clear-eyed, right? And look at what your life is and what you want. And it's a cost-benefit ratio, you know? And
yeah,
it's been a great ride, you know?
I love this. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And there's so much from this conversation. Holy cow. I'm just like, and it doesn't even matter if you're married or not. It's just like anyone that you're even doing business with, you know, it's like you want to be with someone that you can trust, that you can rely on, that has your best interests, you know, heart, that's going to take care of something as much as you want it, you know, you can. There's a lot of lessons here, and I can't even imagine. Gosh, I'm just like, you guys are so cute. The URL.
I know.
So adorable. Thank you so much for modeling this and leading from how your perspective, though, like as much as, you know, Craig is cool, in my eyes, you're cooler because it's hard. Like you said, this is very not traditional. This isn't what the other 99% are doing.
No.
There is no, you know, breakfast situation. There wasn't stability. You had to adapt. You guys had work together. I mean, like, this is tough shit. And
it's
like
really hard.
Like really, really tough. And then how to regulate yourself and then everyone in between. And then like suddenly there's a whole village involved too.
Yeah.
And then also in the startup world, it's not exactly like IPO, you know, and it's you know, there's a rotating door. And so then you have all the different peoples and stuff like that. But then how do you then also grow up to have the culture that's leading the household? But it really comes from the leader, the business leader. And so you contributed so much in his business leadership that really kind of gave him that 360 to be able to do what he was able to. You enabled him in all the secure attached ways.
Yes.
And I'm not saying you were perfect, and like you admitted as well, like we're all human. There was a lot of lessons on how to, you know, get from a princess moment to not a princess moment, right? I guess it's the most simple way to put it. But because you guys chose each other and love each other so much, and you guys were so in love, then you guys wanted to actually work it out and make it happen, and you're on your way. So, goodness, thank you so much for sharing and being a living example of something that's so hard for people, because it's already hard to go to Series A, for example, or Series B. And that's already a whole nother thing, like let alone having to deal with a whole household situation and human babies and cloud babies, all of that.
Yeah, human babies. Yeah, it was hard, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, we had, so it was hard, but the love and the vision is sustaining, right? And and my independence and his independence, right? Because so this has been just a joy to talk to you. I love talking to you. You're the best.
I love talking to you. Thank you, Katie, for your time, and I can't wait to hear about questions from people. Oh my gosh, I'm excited. So thank you again.
Thank you.